because 28 years ago, I was where all of you are now. I was at both Walter Reed and Bethesda Naval before they combined into one, in limbo on what's next. And I was in that holding pattern where you don't know when you're going to get it. Do any of you know the exact date of when you're going to get out? You do. How long did it take you to get that date?
A little over a year.
Frustrating, right? You don't know when somebody's going to tell you. You just don't. And it's incredibly frustrating. And on top of that, you don't know what it is you're going to do. So Bob said something interesting during his intro. His words were, the key is to do something you're passionate about. That is truly the key in life, in my opinion and in my experience. So I'm going to take you back to Navy. I joined the Navy in 1986. I got out in 1991. I'm sorry, 1988. I reported to the Naval Communication Area Master Station Mediterranean. I was a Navy radioman. How many of you have had to, even though it was not your MOS or your rating, had to serve a security duty in addition to what you were supposed to do? Can you raise your hands? Right, so all of you. So there I was, brand new to this command. I was serving at the front gate, about the 20th in line of security, which was good for anybody that wanted to break into our command. It was a NATO base, so you had Navy, or you had Italian Carabinieri military police at the front gate. You had military, or our military police beyond them. You had a Marine with weapon at our front door, and then you had me. I don't know where I fall in the lineup, but fortunately, it was pretty far down. I didn't know anybody at the command, and a girl named Angela Santos, RM3, Radioman 3rd Class, Angela Santos, was walking out the door. I'd never met her, and I said something to her, where are you going? To the effect of, where are you going? And she said, I'm going to the USO Club for the party. And I had heard about this party because there were 2 ships in port, and everybody knows that when ships are in port, parties happen. And she was organizing this party for these 2 ships. She said, hey, do you want to go? And I thought, well, that's really cool, because I didn't know her, I didn't know anybody, but I was really exhausted because reporting over to Italy, reporting to a new command, you're tired. And I said, nah, it's okay, I'm going to go home and go to sleep after this shift. And I did. And I'll never forget her words and her kindness, saying, hey, do you want to go? So she went to the USO, and a bomb was placed outside. Hunzo Akadori is a terrorist that did this. He is still wanted, so if anybody knows where he is or knows where to find him, please send him to authorities. Angela, along with 4 Italians, were killed that night. It took me 30 years, and I'll get to that as we go through the story, to realize how much that affected me 30 years later. All right, fast forward to 1991. I was now out of the Navy. I moved to Annapolis. I met a guy, fell in love, and he was starting a computer business. I was finishing my degree in journalism. I knew I had always wanted to be a journalist, and now having a 17-year-old kid who doesn't know what she wants to do, I know I'm a minority. Not many people know what they want to do at 7 years old. I was very clear. I'm going to be a veterinarian, or I'm going to be a journalist. My mathematical and scientific aptitude lent to journalism, no doubt about it. So grew up in a family in Washington, D.C. Uncle was the editor of a big newspaper here called the Washington Star. My aunt was the fashion editor of it. So journalism played prominently in my life. Got the degree, husband's growing his business, I'm helping him grow his business. His one customer led to 2 customers, led to 10 customers, led to 20 customers, led to us saying, we just can't work together well, because husband and wife should not be working together unless they're incredibly different than we are. So there I was. I started my freelance writing career. I worked for some military publications around the Washington, D.C. area, ended up in Annapolis, and started working for the Capital newspaper, Capital Gazette newspaper. Anybody familiar with the Capital Gazette? Anybody familiar with the bad news that happened at the Capital Gazette? Okay. So I worked for the Capital Gazette for many years, local journalists telling local stories that matter. Everybody needs to know what's happening in their communities. The job of a journalist is to answer who, what, when, why, where, and how. It's not to provide opinion unless it's labeled as opinion or labeled as editorial. So my job is always to answer who, what, when, why, where, and how of what is happening in my community. So 2012, that brings us to. 2012, I was diagnosed with breast cancer and had my surgery, and that left me with nerve damage across my chest, which I live with today. Many women that have mastectomies will have nerve damage and they live in pain, and I am one of them. I don't let it stop me. Some days I do, quite often actually. I will let it stop me from doing things, and I'll lay down and I'll get mad and I'll get frustrated because pain isn't fun. Anybody else in pain? Pain isn't fun, right? It's exhausting. And sometimes you just need to take breaks from it, and that's fine. So about a year after taking a break from that and realizing I need to do something, I'm bored, but I just need to do something, WNAV radio station in Annapolis, owned by Pat Sajak, came along and they said, hey, what are you doing? And I said, well, not much. And they said, how about working for us? And I said, I don't know anything about radio. And they said, no problem, come learn. So I did, and I've been there ever since. So hired by WNAV to share news on radio. I knew nothing about radio. Then they gave me a show that I host, and I said, what am I supposed to do? Figure it out. And so I've been producing this show and hosting this show for 4.5 years now. It's won several awards, including the Associated Press Best Public Affairs Show for a couple of years. It's on social media. In addition to on radio, I realized my background as print and as online didn't lend well to just an AM radio station with just communicating things by AM signal. I wanted it out there to a broader audience, so I became the social media maven at WNAV. I created that position. It didn't exist before. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, all of it, everything that I do is on all of those platforms. We reach a lot of people through those platforms that we weren't reaching through AM radio alone. And there is no such thing as just a radio station anymore, or just a newspaper anymore, or just a TV network anymore. All of us are operating in the social platform as well. I tell stories about what is important to me. I set my own hours. I am able to tell stories that I am passionate about, and I have been awarded a fair amount of awards on these stories that I'm very passionate about. I'm passionate about veterans. I host a lot of shows and tell a lot of stories about veterans because I am one. 2 weeks ago, I ran into a friend I met on a fly fishing trip for veterans and breast cancer survivors. Like, that was kind of very, very narrow audience, but somehow we were both on it.
Oh, no.
Her breast cancer is far different than mine. She has metastatic breast cancer. It doesn't go away. And we sat down and we talked, and she said, it's been really tough. She's a single mother. She's got 2 young children, and she's got to go through all this pretty much by herself because she has X amount of leave days as a civilian working for the federal government. She's blown past them because of the chemotherapy treatments and because of getting sick over the summer with this cancer going into yet another area of her body. So she owes the federal government money, and she has to continue chemotherapy. She can't ask people for donation of leave days, but the federal government has a donation of leave days program. I can ask people for a donation of leave days, and hey, I'm a journalist. Things I'm passionate about. A veteran, a woman that's sick with breast cancer, I put word out. This was last week. I shared this on my personal Facebook, not on my organization's Facebook page. She has been donated 240 days of leave since I put this out. She's allotted 265 that she can get. She'll be a guest on my show next week. I recorded it yesterday with her. So I think she'll get the remaining leave days. That won't be an issue. There's a story I'm passionate about. I'm making a difference in my community. giving back to veterans. What else? Children. There's in Anne Arundel County, which is where I live, there is a community called Severna Park. It's a very upper class, mostly white area. And they have a problem with adolescent suicides. They have such a problem with adolescent suicides that two sociologists, one from the University of Chicago, one from the University of Memphis, came to this community to study it. Now, because of privacy issues, they couldn't say that they were in Severna Park, so they called it Poplar Grove. The study, if any of you are interested, is online. Look up Poplar Grove and suicides. I didn't think this should be kept in the dark anymore. I thought parents had a right to know. I thought new people moving into Severna Park had a right to know about this issue. And what could help stop this? What was causing it? The sociologist said what was causing it was the entire community. It wasn't just the schools. It wasn't just the coaches that are pushing these kids at age 4 to be the best lacrosse players they can possibly be. It wasn't just the pastors or the church. It was the entire community had a role to play, and it's going to take the entire community to help stop it. I was reporting on this before anybody else started reporting on this, and I will continue reporting on it because it's still an issue in the community. Children should not be dying. Bald eagles, also not in my reporting, has been a thing. So this is where personal and professional worlds have collided. So bald eagles are my thing. I volunteered as a bald eagle nest monitor for the Maryland Bald Eagle Nest Monitoring Program. They are not a resource that we can take lightly, that we can think that will always be here, because they weren't always here. Bald eagles were almost wiped, or were at the brink of extinction because of a pesticide called DDT. DDT did not allow their shells to form, thus no new bald eagles were formed. When I was a kid, we hardly ever saw bald eagles in the wild. Today in Centerville, today in Annapolis, how often do you see them, Bob?
All the time.
It's the most amazing recovery story of my lifetime as far as I'm concerned, and I want to make sure they continue to survive and to continue to flourish. So if I can help out in my spare time being a bald eagle nest monitor, I sure will. In February 2016, 13 bald eagles were found on a farm on the eastern shore of Maryland in a town called Federalsburg, dead. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service immediately responded along with Maryland Natural Resources Police, and after a month or so they said the birds did not die of natural causes. That was February 2016. In August 2016, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service says we have no leads, we're closing the case by. 13 bald eagles dead, humans had done it, and they're not going to tell us what did it. And I wouldn't have that. So I started working on the story in September 2016. Not who did it, but what did it. And I shared that information once. I submitted FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request, after Freedom of Information Act request, emails, telephone calls, and by June of 2018, last summer, I got the answer. It's a federally banned pesticide, a pesticide again, but one that's been banned for 10 years, called carbofuran, that had killed the birds. Why do I continue reporting on this story even today? 30 bald eagles have died on Maryland's eastern shore, victims of pesticide poisoning by carbofuran, a federally banned pesticide, in the decades since carbofuran has been banned. Why has that happened? In the past, it's happened because people that own regulated shooting areas, they're called RSAs, hunting preserves, on the eastern shore have ducks that they release for hunters that will ultimately shoot the ducks and kill the ducks. However, one of the top things on a bald eagle's menu preference are ducks. So before the hunters get to the property, bald eagles were taking the ducks, lots of ducks, and eating them. That's why it's been happening. So it's an important story as far as I'm concerned. The bald eagle is our symbol of freedom. Here I am today talking about it. Not all wounds are visible. So I ended up at Walter Reed, and I ended up at Bethesda Naval Hospital for wounds that aren't visible. And it's okay to talk about these wounds and stigmas that we used to have. I do have mental health issues, and I hold them proudly because it's part of who I am. Don't hold back. Don't, it's not secretive anymore. It's okay to have mental health issues. It's okay to be a doctor, a lawyer, a journalist, a sheriff. It's okay to have mental health issues. We've been through some crazy things in our lives before, after, and during the military. June 28th, 2018. Anybody know what happened in Annapolis?
Yeah. A shooting. Yeah.
A mass shooting at the place I used to work, at the Capitol newspaper. And the woman that took over the column that I used to write in the Capitol, she was one of 5 killed there. And it brought back all that pain and all that turmoil and that shock and all those feelings and the wanting to hide under the table and the asking of questions. And it brought back all that sadness that had happened and that PTSD, I guess, from Naples in 1988. So do what you're passionate about. Embrace who you are, the flaws and all, and I promise you will get through this period of time that you're in right now in limbo, and 30 years from now, you'll be standing here speaking before other veterans. Thanks.